Any week one of an NFL season is always going to give us some stuff that is unexpected. And there's going to be a lot of things that happen in week one that end up not mattering, but I've delved deep into the minds of the week one NFL data, and I have pulled 7 stats that can basically tell us the story of what I expect to be big storylines for fantasy football in 2025, beginning with running back inefficiency. 25 of 32 running backs with 10 or more carries average less than 4 yards per carry. I got that from my friend Ben Gretsch. Only Breece Hall, Derrick Henry, and Travis Etienne cleared that mark. And if you take away that 71-yard run for Travis Etienne, his median success rate was actually a lot lower than 4 yards per carry. I think our takeaway there is that NFL defenses are no longer allowing teams to run. You know, there's sort of been this takeaway with the 2 high safeties, the shell coverage, that teams are willing to stop explosive runs, but they are going to give you 4 yards on the ground. They are going to give you 5 yards per ground. I've seen some analysis on Twitter that has basically been NFL teams are actually moving their defensive lines and their linebackers to the strong side of a formation pre-snap, like right when the ball gets snapped. Now, I don't know if every defense is doing that, and you guys know I'm more of a stats guy than an X's and O's guy, but I do think it is pretty clear NFL offenses are just in an absolute bind right now. And one of the solves to being in that bind is our second stat here, which is that we saw quarterback scramble rate and quarterback rushing touchdowns go way up in week one compared to 2024. Scrambles were up for 2 to 2.7 per game for every quarterback. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to remember that's league-wide. So that includes Joe Flacco. That includes Matt Stafford. That was up from 1.7 or 5.3% of dropbacks. Last year, there were 167 quarterback rushes, 806 rushing yards, and 13 rushing touchdowns for 4.8 yards per carry. That's 24.5 yards per game and 0.39 touchdowns per game versus 2024, 16.6 yards per game and 0.16 touchdowns per game. Now, are quarterbacks on average going to score 0.39 rushing touchdowns per game? I don't think so, but this is one that should just be pretty evident from, watching the games. In particular, there are 2 that I'm thinking of, which is Patrick Mahomes on that Friday night game and Caleb Williams against the Minnesota Vikings. It was just so evident, particularly for Mahomes. Your wide receivers are not open. Your guys are not there on the RPO stuff or their option routes. You sit, and they never come open. Hollywood Brown is not getting open. DJ Moore is not getting open on 3rd and 7. So you just take off and go. We also saw that with Jalen Hurts on the Thursday night game as well. We saw some of that with Lamar and Josh. Those guys are always runners. But I think particular Mahomes is, and it's not just because I like Mahomes and because I'm a Chiefs fan, the Mahomes stuff is he's just frustrated. These quarterbacks are just sitting in the pocket and they're frustrated and they're going, it's 3rd and 7. None of my guys are open. I need to make something happen. And the thing that I can make happen, because all the defenders are so concentrated, they're so far down the field. I mean, think about how far safeties and defensive backs are away from the line of scrimmage trying to limit these explosive plays. They're giving 15, 20, 25 yards of just nothing. There's no one there. You see some of these quarterback scrambles, and there's not a defender in the frame when the quarterback gets to the first down. Another correlated piece here is our third stat, which is that route participation for running backs went way up in week one. Route participation for running backs went up in week one to 29.1%. And again, this is stuff that I ran. This is all running backs. This is everyone from Nick Chubb to Dare Ogunbowale. Running back route participation up to 29.1% from 22.6. Now, the targets per route run, actually, weirdly enough, totally flat. 19% total targets per route run for running backs last year, 19% targets per route run in week one for running backs this year as well. Yards per route run, interestingly enough, actually dipped a little bit in our 1 week sample from 1.05 yards per route run to 0.97 yards per route run. The target share also stayed the same. What's our takeaway there? What is that to say? Which is that these running backs, instead of staying in to pass block, are out there running routes. And I think that running back and participation in general at the high end is actually going to be higher. When I did a little bit more micro diving in this analysis, like Jahmyr Gibbs with 10 receptions, 9 receptions for Christian McCaffrey. Breece Hall was used heavily in the passing game. Kyren Williams ran a ton of routes. I do think running back pass catching for the guys that we care about is actually going to be, it's actually going to be quite a bit higher, right? This league-wide stuff does show a little bit of a discrepancy in doing analysis this way, which is that at the high end, running backs are going to catch more passes because it's something that defenses are giving you. Again, right now, what defenses are trying to do, our first three stats all show the same thing, which is that defenses are just saying, you are not getting 40-yard plays on us. If you want to get 5-yard plays, if you want to throw the ball to Justice Hill, you are more than welcome to have it because we are going to stop you from getting these 40, 50-yard plays. So those were all sort of larger macro analysis. We're going to go a little bit more narrow here for stat 4. Deebo Samuel in week 1 for the Washington Commanders had his most total interactions, which I would define as targets plus carries, since week 2 of 2024. You might know that Deebo Samuel suffered an injury in that game, which caused him to miss week 3. He basically played injured for the rest of the season, and then also in that game against the Chiefs, remember, that was the pneumococcal pneumonia game for Deebo Samuel. He looks like the same Deebo Samuel that we remember from 2022, from 2023. He looks exactly like the guy that the Commanders signed, a really useful, a really relevant fantasy player, and I think a better fit for the Commanders and Cliff Kingsbury's offense than Terry McLaurin, who had only 4 targets in this game. He had only 3 games in all of 2024 where he had 4 or fewer targets. In my opinion, I think this is a pretty strong signal that Deebo Samuel is actually in the featured role of this offense, and McLaurin is kind of in a role that suits him better. He's in the role that he was at Ohio State. You know, he is a really, really good deep threat wide receiver. You don't want to use him as much on the horizontal breaking stuff. You don't want to use him as much in the screen game, which was where he generated so many of his statistics last year. I'm a little bit concerned about McLaurin, and frankly, I'm a little bit concerned that I don't have Deebo Samuel on enough of my fantasy teams. I think the arrow is pointing all the way up for him. A little bit of an unfortunate truth here for some of us. Kyren Williams is exactly who we thought he was. He played 81% of the snaps. He handled 18 of 19 running back carries. Blake Corum's first carry did not come until late in the third quarter. Jarquez Hunter was actually just inactive for this game. One of the running backs that people imagine would be one of the running backs spelling Mr. Kyren Williams. Cody Schrader was elevated as the running back 3 to play special teams. And again, this is a guy who generated, guess what? 16.5 expected fantasy points, actually scored fewer fantasy points than expectation because that's what Kyren Williams does. I get why people hate on Kyren Williams. He's not fun. He's not exciting. But guess what, man? The Los Angeles Rams get to the 3-yard line. Guess who's getting the ball? It's Kyren Williams. Stat number 6, and this is more of a way to analyze the game of fantasy football. Only Christian McCaffrey generated more expected fantasy points than Malik Nabers. And Malik Nabers didn't have like a truly absurd target share. I mean, he was very involved. He had 9 targets in this game. But we can learn 2 things here. The first is Christian McCaffrey is the best player in fantasy football. Christian McCaffrey generated 30.3 expected fantasy points in this game against the Seattle Seahawks, a very tough defense. Didn't score a touchdown, and that is always going to limit your ability to generate fantasy points. And then the other coin here is that Malik Nabers is a huge buy low in every format of fantasy football. You want to play Nabers in DFS. You want to play Nabers in Battle Royales on Underdog. Use code Davis for a deposit match there, by the way. And a third little mini lesson here for you is that when Jackson Dart takes over this offense, Jackson Dart is going to have himself an absolute limousine, a luxury option as his wide receiver 1. Russell Wilson, not really capable of making the throws anymore. Russell Wilson, can't scramble. Russell Wilson can't evade the pressure the way that I think Jackson Dart is going to be able to do behind this patchwork New York Giants offensive line. Our final stat number 7, Jackson Smith-Njigba was the only player in week 1 to have 50% or more of his team targets. Now, is Jackson Smith-Njigba going to have a 54% target share every week over the course of the season? No. Could JSN be one of the very few players in the modern NFL to have a 30% target share? Yeah, I'm actually pretty sure that he can be. Cooper Kupp had a 9.5% route win rate from Fantasy Points Data Suite. That is his lowest in over a year. He had a 14.5% win rate last year. Keep in mind, that's like a huge sample from 2024 where he was playing with the ankle injury. He had some good games in there. Like, we actually think that Cooper Kupp was awful last year. He had a 2.04 yards per route run. Cooper Kupp is effectively burnt toast. Sam Darnold knows how to do one thing in this offense, which is give the ball to Jackson Smith-Njigba. I was a little bit too low on Jackson Smith-Njigba coming into the year, and I'm looking to rectify that right now. So to recap our stats here, 25 of 32 running backs finished with lower than 4 yards per carry. Quarterback scrambles and rushing touchdowns are way up. Running back route participation is way up. Deebo Samuel is the guy you want in Washington. Kyren Williams is the unfortunate truth. CMC is still the 101. We're buying low on Malik Nabers, and JSN is him for the Seattle Seahawks.